May 20th, 1916. The peaceful isolation of the Stromness whaling station on South Georgia Island is shattered by a screaming manager. He rushes the station captain outside, insisting he has to see this for himself. Waiting in the snow are three strangers. They are emaciated, their clothes are reduced to filthy rags, and their faces are thick with dark beards and frostbite. They look as though they haven't bathed in years. The captain asks who they are. The man in the center steps forward and speaks a single name, Ernest Shackleton. The captain stares at him in stunned silence. He hadn't heard that name since November 1914. Shackleton and his 28-man crew had vanished into the Antarctic ice 2 years prior. By this point, the global consensus was that they were all dead. How does a man trapped in the most hostile environment on Earth and completely written off by history walk out of the ice to tell the tale? And what exactly did it cost to keep his crew alive?
The timeline winds back to August 1914. As Europe mobilized for the First World War, Shackleton launched the Imperial Trans-Antarctic Expedition. His objective was staggering. One team would sail deep into the Weddell Sea, disembark, cross the landmass on foot, and exit on the opposite side at the Ross Sea. For this, he meticulously selected a 28-man crew of sailors, mechanics, and doctors, prioritizing individuals who could maintain composure under extreme pressure. They boarded the Endurance, a ship heavily reinforced to combat freezing waters. But the ocean had other plans. By January 1915, the water surrounding the Endurance solidified into a thick sheet of sea ice, locking the ship completely in place in the middle of the Weddell Sea. The ship was entirely immobilized, but the ice floe itself was drifting. This vast frozen sheet acted as a moving prison, carrying them further away from civilization and deeper into a dark -30°C winter. The physical mission of exploration had officially failed. For Shackleton, the goal shifted from crossing a continent to keeping 28 men from being consumed by the Weddell Sea. The physical environment became a torture chamber. Millions of tons of shifting ice pressed against the hull of the Endurance, creating a relentless, terrifying sound of thick wooden beams twisting and splintering under the pressure. To defend his men against a creeping panic, Shackleton enforced aggressive normality. He built a strict daily routine, mandating that the crew exercise the sled dogs and play football right on the frozen ocean. 10 months later, the ice finally delivered the fatal blow. The pressure crushed the Endurance entirely, sending it to the bottom of the Weddell Sea and leaving the men marooned on the surface. With the ship gone, Shackleton gathered his men and officially declared the original mission over. Their identity as explorers ended. They were now survivors with one destination: home. Behind the scenes, he engaged in a calculated deception. As their rations dwindled, Shackleton intentionally lied to his men about the exact quantity of food remaining to prevent a spiral of despair. By shielding them from the reality of their dwindling supplies, Shackleton ensured that morale, their most fragile asset, remained intact. By April 1916, a new terror emerged. The solid ice floe they had camped on for months violently began to crack open beneath their tents. They were forced into an agonizing evacuation. The men had to drag 3 wooden lifeboats, each weighing over 1,000 kilograms, across jagged, actively melting ice. Their living conditions collapsed completely. They survived by hunting penguins and seals, eventually having to butcher their own sled dogs for food, all while enduring the freezing spray of open water. After nearly a year and a half living on top of the frozen ocean, they finally dragged their boats onto the solid rock of Elephant Island. But reaching land came with a horrific catch. Elephant Island was entirely barren, devoid of animal life, and completely isolated from any known global shipping routes. Surviving the ice had landed them on a rock, with absolutely no food, with 0 fuel, and no hope of being spotted. He organized a final, desperate gamble. Shackleton left 22 men behind on Elephant Island to take 5 crewmates in a lifeboat across 1,300 kilometers to reach South Georgia. That route crosses the Drake Passage, the deadliest stretch of water on Earth, defined by hurricane-force storms. For over 2 weeks, the 6 men fought for their lives. They navigated a tiny wooden shell up and down 12-meter-high swells,
bailing freezing water constantly to keep from capsizing. Miraculously, the battered boat reached South Georgia. However, the extreme ocean currents had forced them to land on the wrong, completely unpopulated side of the island. The final physical toll of this journey was staggering. To reach the whaling station, Shackleton and 2 of his men had to hike 40 kilometers over unmapped, lethal glacial mountains without any climbing gear. Shackleton absorbed the highest concentration of physical risk himself, placing his own life in direct jeopardy so that the majority of his team wouldn't have to. Which brings the timeline back to May 1916. After marching blindly across 3 treacherous mountain passes, Shackleton stumbled out of the snow and saw the Stromness station below. Despite his utter physical exhaustion, his urgency never dropped. He immediately secured a reinforced ship from the Chilean government and turned right back toward the ice. It took Shackleton 3 agonizing, failed rescue attempts over 3 months before he finally broke through the frozen waters to reach Elephant Island. When he arrived, the payoff was extraordinary. In his absence, his second-in-command, Frank Wild, had perfectly replicated Shackleton's strict daily routines. All 22 abandoned men were alive and waiting on the beach. The final statistics of this expedition defy logic. 28 men spent nearly 2 years marooned in the most hostile environment on the planet, enduring starvation, sub-zero oceans, and total isolation. There were 0 casualties. On paper, the Endurance mission was a disaster. In reality, it became a masterclass in resilience, defined by a total psychological refusal to surrender, even after the plan had shattered.